Okay, so welcome everyone. I have 4 p.m. Eastern time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Once again, welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Catalyze webinar series, Make It Matter, Preparing and Delivering Effective Pitches. My name is Patrick Ahern with RTI, and I'll be helping out with the virtual room today. So please note when you log in, your microphone and web camera will be automatically muted. If you have any questions for a presenter, please submit those into the Q&A window and we will address them as time permits. If you run into any technical issues this afternoon, please reach out to me in the chat window and I can help troubleshoot. Towards the end of today's session, we will be putting a link in the chat to a brief feedback survey. So if you wouldn't mind taking a few moments to fill that out, it would be much appreciated. And at this time, Steve, I'll turn the session over to you. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here and to have everybody online for this presentation. What I'm going to do, so go ahead, Patrick, and bring up the first slide. The first thing I'm going to do today is talk about preparing a pitch deck for a presentation to investors. Now, I recognize that a lot of the folks that are online today are probably academic innovators working inside of universities and not really too familiar with what I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to go through what we call our pitch deck template. By the way, I should introduce myself. I'm the investor in residence with the Office of Translational Alliances and Coordination at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute. And I have a lot of experience in being an academic investigator as well as working for large and small companies. And I've been a CEO of several startups, and I'm currently an investor with one of the larger organized angel groups in the country. And I spend a lot of my time advising companies within the NHLBI and within the SEED program at NIH on how to commercialize how to accelerate their commercial aspects of their technology so that they can attract private capital. So the deck that I'm going to go through quickly here is one that we've prepared. It actually is a deck that is akin to a 15-minute pitch that you would present to an organized angel group or an investor group. So it's longer than I know what you will need for your Catalyze program. But I want to go through this deck first, and then we'll talk about how to shorten the deck to bring it down to a 5-minute pitch, and then maybe even a 90-second elevator pitch. So we're going to go through this fairly quickly. And then I'm going to show a video of a pitch that we think is quite good. It's about a 12-minute pitch, and I'll go through and point out some characteristics of that pitch towards the end. And then we're going to have about 15 minutes of Q&A at the end. So we're going to go through this particular deck fairly quickly. So the first slide in your pitch deck should basically talk about, go back to the first slide, Patrick, should talk about the name of the company. There should be a short tagline underneath the name of the company that says precisely and concisely what the technology is that you are doing. And so once you're finished talking about this slide, your audience should know exactly what you're doing as a company. I wouldn't worry so much about the date and presentation and venue, but at the bottom of the slide, you should have your name, your title, and your contact information. And let me also point out that this pitch deck template, I think, is going to be available to you. Don't use the NIH logo and so forth. You should think about using your own information and make it your own for your particular company. All right, next slide, Patrick. So the first slide within the body of the deck actually presents the problem that your technology is going to try to solve. And there should be one slide here. It should very clearly explain what the problem is, if it's an unmet need, why is it so, and so forth. There should be several bullets, maybe a little bit more information than this, but remember that your font should be large enough so people can read it, especially these days when everybody's getting online on Zoom, on laptops, and so forth. So outline the problem that you're trying to solve with your technology. Next slide. So the solution comes third in the deck. And I think there's several solution slides here, but the point of this is you should describe what your technology is and how it solves the problem. So in a 15-minute deck, you might have 2 or 3 solution slides. but you should keep it fairly simple. Remember that you may be talking to investors who don't really understand your technology sector. Next slide. So this is another solution slide. Again, you should be able to do a solution, describe your solution in no more than 2 slides. Next slide. This is a third solution slide. So a lot of times in a 15-minute pitch, people spend 2 or 3 slides on the product or the solution to the technology, to the problem that you're trying to solve. Next slide. And so now, one of the things that investors want to hear about, especially in healthcare technologies, is about the health economics. Why is this product going to be something that will be commercially viable? What benefit does it bring to the healthcare sector? Does it improve the speed to recovery? Does it reduce the amount of hospitalization time? There's a number of different things that you should think about with respect to your specific technology. There's a lot of detail on this template slide that you can read through, but you should think about what is the benefit of your technology to the healthcare sector and why is it going to have a health economic impact. Next slide. You also need to understand and convince the investor that you understand about reimbursement and reimbursement strategies. So is your technology reimbursable? Particularly, do you think that it's reimbursable through some type of reimbursement code that already exists? Or do you think you're going to have to develop your own reimbursement code for this novel technology? And I'll point out that it's much better and more effective for investors if your technology falls under an existing reimbursement code, because it can take as much as a year and a lot of work to get a new reimbursement code established. So just keep that in mind, but you definitely need to be able to tell the investor and the investor audience that you understand the whole reimbursement story and you've got a strategy on how you're going to address that particular issue. Next slide. Probably one of the more important slides in your deck is going to be about your intellectual property and your barriers to entry by competitors. So ideally, you have, so I'm sure that in a lot of cases in the Catalyze program, the intellectual property is probably developed and currently held by the university. As you move forward, if you form a company around the technology, you're going to need to license the technology from the university. And I would just emphasize that the technology needs to be licensed in a way that's attractive to investors. If you have licensing arrangements with your university that are not necessarily beneficial to a startup company, that's going to make your investors less than happy. So you need to think about how you license technology from the university. Ideally, your technology will be patents that will be either applied for or issued. They're likely to be US patents. It's important, especially if you're in the pharmaceutical sector, it's important for your patent portfolio to include strategies to cover the technology outside of the US, especially in the major ex-US markets like the European Union, Japan, China, et cetera. And then finally, one thing that it's probably way too early to even think about this, but one thing that investors look for is a freedom to operate assessment. And what that means is that you will be able to commercialize your technology without infringing on somebody else's patent. And so this is usually conducted by a law firm. There's informal freedom to operate assessments, and there's formal ones. The formal ones can be quite expensive. Sometimes, but not often, sometimes the universities will do an informal freedom to operate assessment. But generally, that's something that the companies are actually expected to do once they've licensed the technology. Next slide. So then another really important point of a pitch deck is the size of the market. Now, investors like to see markets that are in the billions of dollars. That starts with a B. So billions of dollars a year. versus millions of dollars. Millions of dollars a year markets are very small markets and probably not very investable. So if you look at the market that you're addressing with your technology, it should have a large market that's in the billions per year. And there's the total addressable market is the size of the complete market. And then there's the serviceable available market. And then the obtainable market is the one that you believe that you can actually get to within the available market that's out there. So just be aware of these types of market assessments, and you should be drilling down on your serviceable available market. That's the one that you believe your technology will be able to reach. Next slide. It's really important for investors to know that you've assessed the competitive landscape for your technology. So we like to see that the small company is aware of the competitive products that are either on the market or being developed as best you can discern. One way to do this is what we call the bingo slide. So you can see it on the left here in green. It basically is it's a table, and across the rows are the different competitors, and down the vertical columns are the different features. So ideally, your technology, say, would be the one across the bottom there. It says new organization. That's your technology, and you've got check marks in all the boxes. And you'll notice that there's 3 competitors listed there, and there's check marks, but they're definitely not in all the boxes. And so it's very easy for the investor to see that A, you understand the competition, and B, you know how your technology differentiates and is better than the competition that's already out there. Next slide. So then there's one of the issues about investing in healthcare technologies is the regulatory hurdles that you have to get through. And so it's important for you to be able to address the regulatory strategy that you have for how you're going to get the product approved through the FDA. You know, what is the regulatory pathway? Are you going to go to, just the US, or are you going to go outside the US as well, and so forth? And so you need to understand what that regulatory strategy is going to be, and you need to be able to address it. So obviously the strategy for a drug product is different than for a medical device or a diagnostic. So you really need to be able to understand how your particular technology is going to be regulated. And then the go-to-market strategy is also important. This is basically telling the investor, we're going to become a fully integrated company. We're going to hire a bunch of salespeople, and we're going to go out and we're going to start selling this product ourselves. And eventually we're going to do an IPO, and we're going to become a public company. So that's one strategy. Another one is we're going to take this technology all the way through phase 2 clinical trials, and then we're going to be acquired by some other company who's going to pay us a lot of money, and the investors are going to get paid back, and we're going to go on that way. So you might have several different strategies on how you're going to get to market, whether it be directly or through some kind of a vendor or through an acquisition. But you need to have some thoughts about that and be able to express what your plans are for go-to-market strategy. Next slide. So the project plan is sort of the next thing. That is basically what you're looking at different milestones that you're going to address. So a milestone is going to be one where once you've achieved the milestone, you've really moved the company to a new level of value, and you're going to then be able to take some additional steps to move to the next milestone. So milestone 1 might be filing an IND, or maybe completing animal studies that would be IND enabling. Milestone 2 might be completing phase 2 clinical trials if it was a drug product. Milestone 3 could be completing phase 3 clinical trials or filing an NDA. Those are the kind of milestones that we're sort of referring to here. There's usually a timeline, so we've got Q1, et cetera, across the bottom there, and then below that is dollar signs. Now, one thing I want to point out here is the dollar signs should represent costs rather than how much money you're going to raise. And let me just take a second to explain this. The early stage companies that are pitching to an audience need to be very careful about understanding who the audience is. If the audience is not made up of 100% accredited investors, then if you start talking about fundraising and how much you're going to raise and what the valuation of the company is going to be, et cetera, you're doing what the Securities and Exchange Commission calls a public solicitation of funds. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. The only problem with the public solicitation of funds is it now makes your company one of those that has been through that process. And having done that now, it makes it a little more difficult for certain types of investors to actually engage with the company afterwards. So we advise you not to deliver any public information about fundraising until you know you've got 100% accredited investor audience, and then it's fine to talk about that. So instead of talking about how much you're going to raise, talk about what the costs are going to be to reach milestone 1, milestone 2, milestone 3. And what that does is it lets the investors in the audience know roughly how much money you think you're going to need to raise, but you're really not talking about fundraising specifically. Next slide. Another extremely important part of your presentation is going to be the team. So the main point you want to make here is, why do you think the team is the best team to be taking this technology forward? And I bring this up and emphasize it because I can tell you that investors probably look more at the team than anything else about the technology. So I'm located in San Diego, and we are completely inundated here with excellent technology. And so it's really not the technology that makes the difference so much as how good is the team that's bringing the technology forward. And so ideally, the management team, the CEO, the C-level executives in the company, or as the company is formed, ideally has some relevant experience with these kinds of jobs. So early stage investors know that an experienced management team are much more likely to be successful than a team that is inexperienced at doing this kind of technology development. So the management team, the C-level folks, really, really important. The founders, the advisors, and the board of directors, all important to have on a slide. It's important probably to have 1 or 2 slides that cover these. We advise you to have headshots of the people that you're talking about, and maybe 1 or 2 really short lines about who they are and what they've done, maybe some logos of companies that they've worked with in the past. It's important to have that information in your deck, but you don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time talking about each of these people. You just put them up there. These are the people, and maybe you want to highlight 1 or 2 of the folks that you think are particularly important to the company. Next slide. So then the last slide of the pitch deck should be a summary slide. And this slide is going to have a list of bullets that are kind of one-liners that basically summarize the most important points that you think you made in your presentation. So, for example, the first bullet would be a novel therapeutic to treat IPF, or something that describes what the technology is, just to remind everybody what it was you were talking about. Maybe you're going to say, we've got an extremely strong intellectual property portfolio. This is a very large market. It's in the, maybe it's a $20 billion market. You might want to put something like that on here. Excellent team, lots of experience, et cetera. And then the final bullet is probably going to be what you're asking for. Why are you presenting to this group? So it could be that you're looking for a CEO, or it could be that you are looking for a strategic partner, or some type of a company to help you develop a market, or something like that. Whatever the ask is should be your final bullet. And then at the bottom of the slide, again, somewhere you need to have the company logo and your name, the presenter's name, title, and their contact information. And what I'll just say is that this slide in a regular 15-minute pitch to an investor audience is going to sit on the screen during the entire Q&A, unless you move around and try to bring up slides, which sometimes is difficult to do. But this is the slide that gets the most airtime in a 15-minute pitch. And so you want to have everything on this slide that sort of reminds the audience of what you've been talking about, why this is an important investment opportunity, and what you're asking for essentially, and how can they contact you. And so Patrick, I think that's the final slide from the pitch deck. So now let's talk about what I just went through is a pitch deck that's probably going to be a 10 to 15 minute slide deck. And that's the kind of pitch that you would present to an investor audience. Now I realize that you might be fairly far away from that at this point. So let's talk about what would you do for a 5-minute pitch. So for a 5-minute pitch, you're going to cover the same material that you just did in that 15-minute pitch, but you're going to do it faster and you're going to be more concise. You're going to have fewer words to say. You are still going to have that opening slide with a great tagline. You're going to have, what's the problem? What's the solution? What's the market size? What's the intellectual property protection? What about the healthcare economics and reimbursement strategy? And the team is important, and again, the summary. But you'll go through it more quickly, and you won't necessarily have as much information or as many slides. By the way, one thing I forgot to mention, when you talk about the technology, the solution, it's always good to have some data. And so at least one data slide, maybe two. But a lot of times we see early stage companies with half of their presentation is about data, and that's not really the appropriate thing for an investor presentation. So your data that you want to have is going to be data that's the most advanced data that you have. Some companies actually have some clinical data, or maybe they have animal model data, or maybe they have just cellular data. But whatever the most advanced data that you have that shows that the product does what you think it's going to do is important to have. And so maybe one data slide in a 5-minute pitch, and then again, your summary slide at the end. Now, I know that there are times when you're going to be asked to do what we call a 90-second pitch. Now, the shorter the pitches get, the more difficult they are, and they need much more practice, and you have to think carefully about the words that you say. So we call the 90-second pitch the elevator pitch. And the reason we call it the elevator pitch is because it's like you walk into an elevator with two other people that you don't know, the door shuts, and it goes up to the 5th floor, and you've got 90 seconds to tell your story to the other people in the elevator. The doors open and they leave, and you want them to remember your story. So you need to think about and practice, how do you give your story in 90 seconds? So there's really no, there are templates for this, but I didn't want to provide templates for the 5-minute pitch or the 90-second pitch, because it's really up to you to figure out how to distill down that 15-minute deck into a 5-minute pitch and then into a 90-second elevator pitch. Elevator pitches maybe don't even use slides. Sometimes I've seen people get up and give a 90-second pitch to an investor audience, and they have one slide, and the slide is the name of the company, a great tagline, the name of the presenter, and basically the presenter gives the story with that slide, and there's nothing else. So you have to sort of figure out how you want to do that. Okay, now I'm going to transition to a presentation that we coached and came across fairly recently that we think is really a good example. It's about a 12-minute presentation. And what I'm going to do is bring up the video and the audio, and I'm going to play this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop during the video and make comments about it so that you get an example of what we think is a good pitch and why it's good and what they did that was really appropriate. So bear with me while I bring up this video. Okay, now before I do that, I have to find Okay, let's see, where is, there we go, sound. Okay. Now, hopefully everybody can see this. Patrick, are you seeing the video?
We do, yes.
Okay, very good. Okay, so here we go. This is Sonavi Labs, and I'm going to play it and then stop it as we go.
Hello, everyone. It's been a great week so far. Thank you, NIH. Thank you, ACA. It is an honor to be with you today. My name is Ellington West. I am the CEO and co-founder of Sonavi Labs. Sonavi Labs is a medical device and software company that is harnessing the power of artificial intelligence to transform the way we detect, diagnose, and manage respiratory diseases.
Okay, so you know the name of the presenter, you know the name of the company, and you know the tagline. You know exactly what it is that this company is doing. And you can, you also obviously have contact information.
We are here to make respiratory health assessment tools as ubiquitous as a thermometer. Now, respiratory diseases account for the most expensive and fatal conditions that we face as a global community. In fact, there are about 750 million people around the world who are suffering from some type of respiratory disease. And most of us think that these diseases are under control, but that's just simply not the case. About one child under the age of 5 loses their life every 39 seconds to pneumonia. Asthma is the most common disease of childhood. COPD is the 3rd leading cause of death in adults, and tuberculosis was the leading cause of death by an infectious disease. Now, why is that? Because all of these diseases are detectable and treatable. So what's going on? Well, the reality is that there just are no objective physiological tools for detecting and tracking acute and chronic respiratory diseases.
Okay, I'm going to stop it here. So this is the problem slide. So what she's done is she's laid out the problem. You know what the problem is. You know how many people suffer from it. You know how big it is. And you know why there's really no solution yet available for this particular problem.
Now, we're all very familiar with blood pressure cuffs for patients with high blood pressure, smart glucose monitors for our diabetic patients, but when it comes to respiratory health, there are just no physiological indicators until now.
Okay, so what you've just heard is what the solution is targeting at, and so now she's going to go ahead and tell you what the solution is.
I'd like to introduce you to F.A.C.C. F.A.C.C is the first FDA-cleared smart digital stethoscope that is intended for clinician and patient use. Now, the device listens to the sound of your lung just like a normal stethoscope, but it then analyzes those sounds, makes a determination, and then transmits that data to either a patient dashboard and app or directly into a physician's EMR. Now,
okay, so she just introduced you to the device and how it works. And now she's going to talk more about this. So this is the solution. And so this is slide 2 of the solution.
How does this work? What is this magic? Well, the reality is that we have 2 proprietary algorithms that are put directly on board the device. So I want you to think of the device as a smart computer that also has the power of a stethoscope. So we have our first algorithm that I want to talk to you about that was actually invented by my father, Dr. James E. West. He's the inventor of the electret microphone. So we know that he has a great acoustic background. That's the microphone that I'm speaking to you on right now. And the importance of acoustics here is that in order for a device like this to work, you really have to remove all that ambient noise, because the only way that you can focus on the nuanced acoustical signatures of lung is to really have that clear read. So we have that algorithm right on board, and then we have our second proprietary algorithm, which is our classification algorithm. Now, this is the one that does all the work. It runs, again, right on board, does not need internet connectivity because we have F.A.H.A right on. And what it does is it listens. It allows and empowers Felix to listen to the sound of your lung. Takes about 10 seconds, and he's just searching and listening for those abnormalities just like a trained physician would. He's accurate. He always has a 95% accuracy rate and is growing. And this device, again, is intended standalone, which means that you can use it anywhere, anytime, with or without internet connectivity. We originally started this project with our focus on the emerging markets. It was a Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation grant that we received of about $6 million that let us do all of this research initially. And through that, we've actually also created the largest pediatric respiratory database in the world. Now, while the device is standalone, it is platform agnostic, which means means that it can work with any platform that currently exists, but we did go ahead and create our own because we did believe that that would maximize the utility and usability for both clinicians and patients. So physicians, after the patient has, we pulled the recordings from the patient, it's immediately then transmitted to our HIPAA compliant cloud and will show up right on that physician's dashboard. Now, this is important because patients often go outside of their parameters of respiratory health, but they're not aware of it because the subjectivity that's involved in how you felt today compared to yesterday, we just need more objective reasoning behind it.
So let me just halt it here and point out a couple of things about this individual's ability to present. She is very articulate. She is speaking to the audience. She's not reading from the slides. The slides have information on them that augment what she's saying. What she's saying does not conflict with the slides, and you as the viewer don't feel like you need to follow her because there's a lot of text on the slide. So that there's a skill to that requires some practice. What she's also done is she's given you some background on the technology. You now know that it was supported by the Gates Foundation. You know a little bit of history about it. So there's a nice story developing here about this technology, and she does it in a very smooth and engaging way.
This is one device, but it has 3 clear users. So let's first talk about that chronic respiratory patient. The device would be prescribed by their physician and then covered by payers. We see our little portion of the market being about $1.5 billion to $2 billion. It's overall a $26 billion market in that telehealth space. And when we think about the benefits for the patient, it's easy to use at home, provides early detection, and it allows you to track those trends and provide insights of progress for providers. Now, I want you to think about like an asthmatic patient, a pediatric asthmatic patient under the age of 5. We know that the patient has been diagnosed with asthma, but then they're sent home with essentially a survey, and their parents are forced to ask them, how are you feeling today versus yesterday? Are you improving? How can you expect a 5-year-old to give you an honest answer or even really have the right understanding of where they are today versus yesterday? So we wanted a very clear way to know when those wheezes are skyrocketing and when we know and can be predictive of an exacerbation. So at that point, both the patient would be informed that you're trending in the wrong direction, and the provider would also be informed.
Okay, so now from the last 2 slides, you have a sense as an investor how big the market is. So the serviceable obtainable market was listed there. It's a large market, and she's given you some healthcare economic benefits for the technology and how that will be beneficial to the patients and to the parents of the patients.
Now, we have, and again, as I mentioned, a 95% accuracy in our ability to detect abnormalities, meaning crackles and wheezes. And we were able to do that through a 13,000 patient study where we've collected about 81,000 recordings from 10 different countries on 5 different continents. And while that was tremendously exciting and so important for chronic management so that we could tell those patients where they stand, just like a thermometer, we took it a step further, and this is where it gets really exciting. With a 95% accuracy rate, we are able to diagnose pneumonia in patients. So we've done this on about 1,000 patients to date, where we had a 5-physician panel from Hopkins, as well as 1,000 x-rays run on each of these patients. And Felix was able to, with a 95% accuracy, identify those patients that have pneumonia without any false positives. Now, this is important because physicians tend to only agree 70% of the time on what it is that they're hearing. This increases the ability to identify pediatric pneumonia by about 20%. Now, usually a physician, once they suspect pneumonia in a patient, they'll send out for an x-ray, right? What we want to do and how we're supporting clinicians is that the same stethoscope that they have around their neck, they would just replace with Felix, who works as a normal stethoscope, but then can also offer that second layer of clinical support and diagnosis eliminating the need to send out for x-ray. Now, as we gear up for a second layer of our regulatory strategy, we are submitting for a pneumonia breakthrough that will have a no x-ray claim to it, and then will immediately be followed up by our de novo. We do have enough data right now and are planning to submit for that breakthrough at the end of this month.
So now the audience knows that they have a regulatory strategy and they know how they're going to approach the FDA. And they also have some information about the accuracy of the technology and how it's beneficial.
Now, it's very important that we think about the opportunity by way of indication, because each indication garners a different price point and has different needs. So we're looking at about $240 million in revenue by 2025 by focusing on and duplicating similarly to what we're doing in pneumonia across these other indications like asthma and COPD. So right now, what we have FDA clearance for is that base model. That means that we can send high fidelity sounds from the patient's home to the provider. There are already existing CPT codes that support the telehealth monitoring, and we've recently applied for those HCPCS codes this past January to cover the hardware also.
So now you know that she's got a plan for reimbursement, and she's talked about the HCPCS codes, and she knows what she's doing with respect to reimbursement coverage.
And the evidence in pneumonia, and we'll be duplicating that through different indications throughout the next 2 to 3 years.
And one more thing I want to say here is we now know that this is not just a one-off technology, one and done. This is a platform technology, and phase 1 is the base model, and then she's going to go after pneumonia, and then asthma, and then COPD, and the audience can see, what those markets are. The total addressable markets are large. And Sonavi's share of the market is over on the right. So it's very clear that she has a market plan and that it's a platform technology.
Now, as I mentioned earlier, we focused on the benefits for the patients themselves, those chronic respiratory patients, but let's talk about how it might benefit a clinician. Right now, we all know that healthcare providers always have their stethoscope around their neck. So shouldn't they be able to increase the sound, be able to automatically have all of that data immediately integrated into their EMRs, but most importantly, they're offered that second layer of immediate confirmation of the diagnosis in respiratory health. Now, when you think about eliminating the x-ray from this continuum of care, it's really powerful for 2 reasons. We're reducing costs, but we're also saving time. Right now, an x-ray is about $400 when we're sending out, if the clinic is fortunate enough to have one, thinking about rural communities in the emerging markets. When you think about Felix, over the course of the 4-year lifetime that the device does have, with the price points ranging from about $300 and $400, depending on clinician or user, we're looking at about a penny a screening.
So this is information about healthcare benefit, and so you have a good sense of what the cost is going to be to the healthcare system and why this is going to be a competitive technology.
Now, there are other digital stethoscopes on the market, but the only thing that I wanted you to think about when you're comparing us to them is the fact that we all auscultate. We can all pick up cardiovascular sounds and respiratory sounds, but none of them are walking into the space of software as a diagnostic the way that we are. We are the first, and we are so proud of that.
So let me just say that this is the bingo card slide that I mentioned. You can see over here, she's got green checks and all of the different boxes under her technology, and the other technologies across the top here, you can see that there's not a lot of coverage. So she's clearly laid out her competitive advantage.
We also, I have to mention that 2 of the companies mentioned here have reached out to us to exclusively either license our adaptive noise suppression algorithm, which we politely declined, and also one has come to us to acquire us, and we again politely declined.
So that's an important statement. She just told you about some traction. So she's got other companies that are really interested in her technology. And so investors like to hear that because, that's a validation of the technology by competitors.
Now, back to just our regulatory pathway, I just want you all to be clear that we are taking the software as a diagnostic route. We are going through pneumonia breakthrough followed by de novo, and that will be repeated through asthma and COPD and ultimately into the cardiovascular space. We're very clear that the opportunity here
2 minutes.
is, got it, thank you, Richard. The beautiful opportunity here is that we can, the way that our technology has already responded so positively to the cardiovascular data that we've shown it, is that this is just another opportunity in due time.
So this is a plan going forward. So you're looking at the next few years ahead, and they've got a very clear pathway to expand their technology into different sectors.
Just to call back, in 2020, we were awarded 5 patents and received that 510(k) clearance. Now, there are really great acquisitions happening in our space. We're seeing a lot of consolidation, and to be very clear, my goal is a 24-month exit strategy, and I find us to be most similar to Propeller Health that was recently acquired by ResMed for about $225 million.
So let me just say here that she talks about exit strategy. So investors in an early stage technology are investing because they expect to get their investment money back with a multiple. So they're not investing and expecting a check every month that would be a % of revenue. They're expecting the company valuation to go up significantly, and then the company to be acquired by a ResMed or one of the companies that she listed there. And that company is going to pay a lot of money for this technology and this company. And then the company is going to repay the investor a multiple of what the investor originally put in. So that's a really important point that a lot of people don't understand.
We have ongoing research, 2 NIH-funded studies at Hopkins, 1 for asthma and 1 for COPD. Our point of entry into the clinician market is through Cornell Medical School, where we're working with our new trained physicians because we believe that it's important to catch them on the front end. It's difficult to change behavior after, so we'll be publishing with Cornell after our pilot early next year. Now, I believe that a great sign of early traction for a pre-revenue company is the unsolicited interest from large companies. So Philips is interested in white labeling. We are a JLabs, Johnson & Johnson portfolio company, and we are actually advisors and partners with FindDX, as well as MREF, the largest distributor of medical devices on the continent of Africa. To date, we've raised about $2.5 million in our seed round, $3 million in non-dilutive funding from the NIH.
Okay, now we blocked this out. We edited this next sentence or two out, and you can see there's a white box here. So she was speaking to a 100% accredited investor audience when she presented this, and she was talking about money that she's going to be raising, and she was asking the audience basically to engage, to participate in this round. So again, here you have the history, how much they've raised, both private capital as well as non-dilutive funding from government. And then she talked about how much she's going to need to raise. Now, when you speak to an audience that's not a fully accredited investor audience, instead of talking about how much you're going to raise here, you should talk about how much it's going to cost you to get to the next couple of milestones. So if you think it's going to cost $5 million to get to the next milestone, don't say I'm raising $5 million. Say, look, it's going to cost us $5 million to get to this point in our development. And, we're raising money. And, if you're interested in coming in and talking to us, come and see me and I'll give you the details personally or one-on-one. So she'll pick up here.
Our team is uniquely qualified to execute. We have 5 PhDs, 1 MD, the inventor of the electret microphone, the former dean of the Whiting School of Engineering. We have 3 successful exits under our belt prior to founding this company. We have Leslie Wise, who's one of the world leaders in reimbursement. She's taken 3 companies public with her strategy. And so I welcome.
So let me just point out on her team, she had headshots of everybody. They were separated in terms of the C-suite and so forth. She only highlighted one person, I think it was Leslie, who she mentioned had a lot of experience in raising funds and taking companies out. So that's the kind of detail that you need. The investor wants to know who they're investing in, having a face to look at, and a little bit of information about them is important. You'll notice that there wasn't like 5 lines of text under each face. There was just a little bit of text there. And she didn't spend a lot of time on that, but she checked the box that, yeah, we've got a team and we're really good.
Your questions. We are so excited about the future and we would love to have you on our CAP table. Thank you.
Okay, so that was the last slide. And again, you can see that she went back to a final slide with the logo of the company. The tagline is here and her contact information is here. Now, one thing that I would recommend to her is, in addition to this, she would have a summary of 4 or 5 bullets of really important things that she wanted to be takeaways for the audience. So with that, I'm going to stop share, and I think we're going to now go to Q&A. So is it?
Steve, I do see there's one question in the Q&A. They say, I'm enjoying all of this, but many of us are also going to be focused on what is needed for the 1-slide pitch, which won't have enough real estate or time to discuss the content of a 15-minute pitch. We'll be very interested in additional cut down advice.
Right, so maybe you joined a little bit late, but I did mention this at the very beginning. The idea of going through this 10 to 15-minute pitch was to talk about the really important points of a pitch deck. My recommendation would be to develop that deck first, and then go back in and shorten it to maybe 6 or 7 slides. That would be a 5-minute pitch. And then think about a 1 slide or 2 slides that would be a 90-second pitch. Again, as you reduce the amount of information on the slides, you're going to reduce the amount of information that you vocalize, but you need to maintain some of the really important points. So obviously, one of the important points is what is the technology? What is the problem that you're solving? Why does this technology work? What is the intellectual property protection? How big is the market? What's your regulatory strategy, your reimbursement strategy, and how, tell us about your team. So I could sort of summarize that in 90 seconds without using any slides, or just using 1 slide with the logo of the company and the tagline and my name on there. And I could simply go through that 5 or 6 lines of information that I would vocalize that cover all of those points. So I hope that is helpful in helping you understand how to distill this down from a 10 to 15-minute presentation down to something that's 5 minutes and then maybe 90 seconds.
Okay, I do see another question here in the chat. Martha asks, would it be worthwhile to interact with the standard coordinating body for RM therapies? And the SCB may have insights about reimbursement strategies.
Okay, there's too many acronyms in there for me. I'm not sure that I understand the question.
So Martha, if you want to you can either raise your hand and we can bring you off mute, or you can also type some explanation into the chat. And also, if anyone else has additional questions, please do put those into the Q&A window or the chat, and we will address those. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Martha.
Yes. Oh, hi, Martha. Martha, are you there?
Martha, it looks like you're unmuted. Oh, and now it's muted.
All right. So can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Great. I would just say that the standards coordinating body, the SCB, interacts a lot with industry. And one of the things that are part of that whole body is to talk about reimbursement strategies. And I didn't know if our audience here would be you know, I don't know if they're aware of the SCB, but I do think that it might be helpful, especially for industry folks, to maybe interact with them a little bit more.
Yeah, so good point, Martha. My sense is that the Catalyze audience is probably not all that familiar with this area. We do in the Office of Translational Alliances and Coordination, we have an expert on reimbursement, Renee Arnold, who participates with us in evaluating and advising early stage investigators and early stage companies about reimbursement and healthcare economics. So those resources are available, and we're happy to provide whatever information we can and answer questions.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I did want to point out that I did put the link to the feedback survey in the chat, so if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to complete that. We do have another question. And actually, Steve, someone wanted me to remind the Catalyze awardees that you will be available for office hours to discuss their pitch. Is that correct?
Yes, I believe we've got something scheduled. I'll have to look at the date, but I will be providing a couple of hours, allowing people to jump on and ask me questions as we go forward. So yes, there will be office hours scheduled.
And the
Okay.
office hours will be provided in a follow-up email.
Okay, and so we do have another question here. What type of audiences or situations are there where you get the 90-second pitch versus the 5 or 15-minute pitch?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. So the one that you heard, Ellington West, that was about a 12-minute pitch that was presented at the Angel Capital Association annual meeting. It was virtual this year, and it was 100% accredited investor audience. And so this is a company that's formed. They own they have rights to the technology, and she is literally out fundraising, and she was speaking to this investor audience. That's the kind of pitch that you would present if you were going to an organized angel group, or if you had got invited to come in and speak to a venture capital firm. If you're seeking funds for supporting the company development. So that's the typical investment pitch. A 5-minute pitch is probably more along the lines of we would call it maybe a pre-screen pitch. Like, for example, if you reached out to an angel investor group, you might want a 5-minute pitch to give a sort of a high-level summary of the company or the technology. And then the idea from a 5-minute pitch is to get the second meeting, which might be an opportunity to stand up in front of the membership and give that 12 to 15-minute presentation. A 90-second pitch doesn't happen very often. It's usually associated with some kind of a competitive program. So for example, the one you heard that Ellington West present, she was one of probably about maybe 10 or 12 companies, maybe it was more than that, that gave a 90-second pitch to the Angel Capital Association. And then the membership chose, I think it was 3 companies to go and to come back later during the meeting to give a more lengthy presentation. And so she had a very, very nice 90-second pitch, and was very engaging, and they wanted her to come back and give that longer pitch. That was so a 90-second pitch is going to probably not happen very often. It's kind of a competitive sort of situation where you might be on a program with maybe 10 or 15 other companies that are trying to get that second meeting.
Okay, I'm not seeing any additional questions at this time. We do have about 6 minutes remaining in the hour. So if you would like to ask Steve any last-minute questions, please submit those into the chat or Q&A. And again, just a friendly reminder that there is a link to the feedback survey in the chat as well.
Yeah, I hope this is helpful. I recognize that I recognize that it would be much more quote unquote useful to everybody if I stood here and told you what you needed in a 5-minute pitch. But I just really, it depends on the technology. And so I felt that it was important to start with more of a full-blown story about the technology and then let you figure out how to simplify it down, distill it so that it really hits the point in 5 minutes or so. We are in the process of coaching companies, they're already companies, for presentation at meetings that are coming up this fall. And a lot of these companies come to us with, 25 slides. And, the first thing we have to do is get them down, if it's a 7 or a 10-minute pitch, they got to get down to, maybe 10 or 12 slides. And so we spend a lot of time trying to coach them on how to consolidate their slides and reduce the amount of information that they're providing without really jeopardizing the story. And so start with a 12 to 15-minute pitch, get your slides organized, be sure that your font is correct, and you hit all of the major points, and then go back through it again and try to distill it down to a 5-minute pitch, and then figure out what the high-level points are that you would use as an elevator pitch, maybe with one slide and a tagline showing for the company. That's my advice.
Okay, I did see one more question come in. How important is the market share in the US versus, say, the European Union, Japan, or China?
Yeah, so good question. I'm going to just sort of make a generalization. When it comes to healthcare markets, usually the US market is about equal to the rest of the world market. So the markets in China, Japan, in the EU, Australia, Canada, they're when you put them all together, they're about the same value as the US market. So they're important, and it's important to understand how to address those markets. It's as I mentioned earlier, if you're doing a pharmaceutical product or a biotech therapeutic product, you need to be able to address through intellectual property protection the major ex-US markets. And the reason for that is that if you're going to develop a therapeutic, you're going to, and you want a strategic investor to come in and support you and then acquire you, like a Johnson & Johnson or a Merck, they will want worldwide rights to the technology. If they don't have worldwide rights to the technology, they're unlikely to want to acquire your company. So it's really important. The market size is important, but it's really important to have ex-US markets covered in your plan for that reason.
Okay, so that's all the questions that I see in the Q&A or chat window. I would like to thank everybody for attending today, and Steve, thanks for your time as well. If you don't have any if you have any closing comments, Steve?
No, I just I want to wish everybody in the Catalyze program good luck with their efforts. And like we said, there will be some time scheduled over the next week or so, a couple of weeks, for some office hours, and I'll be happy to speak with you individually.
Okay, once again, thanks everyone for your attendance. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you, Steve, and everyone have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.